Remember to embrace empathy as a strength, not a weakness. Where I see the future going is that more leaders embracing this because they're going to see more leaders that embrace it win. It's not even the future of work anymore. It's here now. It looks very different, and that's okay.
You are listening to This is Product Marketing, brought to you by Product Marketing Hive, the product marketing community that gives back. I'm your host, Louise Liu. Product Marketing Hive and this podcast are supported by Product Marketing Edge, a technology product marketing consulting firm. In this episode, Maria Ross, author of The Empathy Dilemma, discusses how to balance performance, people, and personal boundaries to achieve empathetic leadership. Let's dive into it right now. Welcome back to our show, Maria.
Thanks for having me again. I appreciate it.
Great. Last time our episode together was great. But for some of the folks who are not very familiar with your book or your background, can you give us a little bit intro?
Yeah, absolutely. So I started out with a career in marketing and brand strategy. I've been on both the client and agency sides and spent about a little over a decade in tech marketing, specifically supporting sales teams. And then I went off on my own and started my own brand consultancy, helping companies, helping solopreneurs to build the brand story and craft their brand story in a way that would connect and engage with the right people, and then ultimately drive sales or whatever actions that organization was trying to drive. And a key ingredient of that is empathy. It's being able to really understand who your ideal customers and clients are. And I find that many of us marketers and product marketers, in the busyness of the work we have to do, we kind of skip that step. And we forget that there's actually people on the other end that need to respond as human beings to whatever we're putting out there. And so empathy comes into play because we really need to understand who they are, what they value, what their goals are, their aspirations, their fears, and put that in context so that we can then speak their language and our marketing can have more of a chance of landing with them. And I get this from B2B companies a lot. Well, that doesn't apply to B2B. It absolutely does, because you're still at the end of the day talking to a human being. And no matter what you say about how practical they are or how, they see through the BS and all that, that's all true. But at the end of the day, they are also humans. And behavioral economics shows us, this whole field shows us that we don't make decisions based on the things we think we make decisions on. So there's a way to connect and bring emotion and aspiration into the message without lying to somebody so that they will actually connect and engage. So that's where the empathy work, sort of the seeds were planted. And then there were other elements that brought me into the empathy work. But I started researching in 2016, I started researching brands and leaders who were winning with empathy because I thought we didn't have enough of a model out there for us to see that this works, that when you operate in this way and you kind of infuse this into your marketing and into your business model at large, you have more success. And so I wanted to shine a spotlight on those leaders and prove that empathy has ROI. And indeed, that is what the data and the research show. So the Empathy Edge came out in 2019 when I spoke to you guys last, and that was really the business case for empathy. This book, The Empathy Dilemma, is really for the leaders who are like, yeah, I want to market with more empathy. I want to be a more empathetic leader, but I'm kind of losing myself in the process. I'm burning out. Performance is slipping, all of these things that they say. And so I wanted to give the converts a guide and we're going to talk about 5 pillars to creating fertile ground for empathy to flourish so that you can get all the benefits that the data show.
About your new book, Empathy Dilemma, why did you decide to write this book? What's the context of it? What have you discovered since last time you researched?
Yeah, so I have been out doing leadership trainings, doing conference keynotes, doing team talks for the last 5 years before this book came out. And this book's actually a direct result of the feedback I was getting. So like I said, whereas the first book was for the skeptics, this book was for the converts of like, yeah, okay, I get it. I'm bought in. I really want to be a 21st century leader. I want to have more success, especially post-pandemic. And so, but here's where I'm struggling. And here's where I'm having challenges. So this book directly addresses the challenges that many leaders face when they're trying to be both empathetic and effective, empathetic and high performing, empathetic and get results, because I truly believe it's both and, it's not either or.
Yeah, I see. But why do you think leaders of organizations they find themselves stuck in between the performance and empathetic approach?
I think because, well, a lot of that I think is due to not really understanding what empathy is and what it isn't. So I spend the beginning part of the book kind of teasing that out and really debunking the myths of empathy. I think we have this false narrative that if you're empathetic, you're weak. Or if you're empathetic, it means you're just nice. Or if you're empathetic, it means that you are caving into unreasonable demands. And that's what's happening, what I was seeing, especially coming out of the pandemic, a lot of leaders who were just completely burned out because they were spending so much time taking care of their teams that they were doing things in the name of empathetic leadership that weren't empathetic, right? Taking on extra work themselves, letting bad performance slide, things like that, where that's actually not empathetic to the rest of the team or empathetic to the person who's struggling. Nobody wants to come to work and fail every day. So when you put off those difficult conversations in the name of, well, I just don't want to hurt their feelings, that's not empathy. That's submission. That's acquiescence. So I think that's a big part of the problem, are those false beliefs around what empathy is and what it isn't. I also think enough people don't know how to apply empathy at work. We think I always start my talks with, empathy is not you crying on the floor with your employees. It's so many other things, big and small, in the way that you solicit input, in the way that you offer flexible benefits, in the way that you give people space as human beings to bring their whole selves to work. And I know that people say that a lot, but what that actually means is that you understand that they don't park their humanity at the door when they come to work. Whatever's going on in the world, socially, culturally, economically, in their own lives, maybe it's childcare, elder care, a medical illness, that's going to affect their ability to perform. And that's where a leader needs to care about what's going on with a person outside of work, because it's actually impacting their performance. And so when people, old school leaders say, like, well, work is work and personal life is personal life, we don't operate that way. And so the more that you can actually acknowledge that and work with people and get curious and listen to them about what's going on and how they're able to do their best work, the better your performance as a team and an organization will be.
So, can you give us your definition of empathetic leadership, and maybe also why do you think this empathy dilemma is potentially dangerous?
Yeah, absolutely. So, for the purposes of my work, and I've sort of over the years collected lots of different definitions of empathy, because there have been lots of different definitions and even different definitions over time. But the one that really makes the most sense from a work context, but also from a life context, is that empathy is the ability to see, hear, and understand, and where appropriate, feel someone else's perspective, and then use that information to act with compassion. So compassion is empathy in action. You can actually be empathetic towards someone, but maybe you don't take an action. Maybe you don't take a right next step with that person. And it doesn't have to be changing your mind. It doesn't have to be, doing what they want, but a next action could be listening. A next action could be giving someone space to process something or vent. A next action could be maybe realizing that that input is valuable and tweaking your decision, or figuring out a way to support that person through the decision if that can't be changed, right? We talk about compassionate layoffs a lot. Like, that decision is made. You're not going to be able to change it, but what can you do to better support the person and be there for them? So you're empathetic in terms of how you separate from them. Well, I think that, there's sort of two ways that leaders can go, right? One, they could say, I'm not subscribing to that silliness, right? I'm going to continue to do command and control. They're going to continue to create environments of fear. And, brain science shows us that when we are under stress or anxiety or fear, we actually lose our cognitive abilities, our abilities that help us do our job well. So it's not really in a leader's best interest to create an environment of fear and stress and anxiety if they really want the best output out of their people. So that's one way they might go, is to sort of go back to the way things were, quote unquote, the status quo, pre-pandemic, pre-whatever. And we're not going back. And so the risk they run there is lost productivity, lost engagement, and also they're not going to be able to attract top talent, because they're going to go somewhere else where they are seen, heard, and understood. So that is what many of the generations in the workforce, not even the youngest ones, are looking for in a workplace culture today. The other extreme is where you are so quote unquote empathetic that you are, as I mentioned earlier, bending over backwards, you're accommodating every single unreasonable demand, you're trying to make everyone happy. That's detrimental as well because those leaders burn out. And also there a lot of resentment builds up in the team, right? Why is she being so accommodating to this person, but not to me? Why am I getting extra work because this person is not performing well and nobody wants to have a conversation with them about why they're not performing well? So you have to remember that empathy is sort of, it flows both ways, but it also flows horizontally in terms of, if you let problems fester with one person or one project because you don't want to rock the boat, right? You don't want to upset someone. You're actually creating this ripple effect of a toxic culture for the rest of the group. And that's not going to enable them to give their best work either.
Yeah, that makes sense. Great definition. In your book, you mentioned the 5 pillars of the effective empathetic leadership. Could you give us introduction of it and then some real life examples you've seen as well?
Sure. So the 5 pillars are self-awareness, self-care, clarity, decisiveness, and joy. And where I got these was through hundreds of interviews over the years, as well as years of research, just uncovering and discovering the common threads of those leaders who were empathetic, but also achieving amazing results. How were they doing it? I was trying to sort of dissect the recipe. And these 5 commonalities kept coming up over and over again with all the people that I would talk to. And oftentimes they didn't even realize they were doing it. They were just like, oh, I don't know. That's just the way I lead. If you're struggling with empathy, if you're burning out, if your team doesn't feel seen, heard, and valued, it could be that one of these pillars or all of these pillars are not strong within your culture. And again, not creating that fertile ground for empathy to thrive. So self-awareness, pretty obvious. A leader needs to put ego aside and examine themselves. Empathy for others has to start with you understanding your own capacity, your own triggers, your own strengths, your own challenges. Where are you shining? Where are you falling down? What is emotionally triggering to you in different conversations so that you can recognize them and create strategies to address them? Because if your own house isn't in order, you don't have space to actually take on another person's point of view without fear or defensiveness. So that looks like taking assessments. Enneagram, Myers-Briggs, DISC, name your assessment that's out there, Clifton Strengths Finder. All of those things help you understand yourself better, and you take some time to self-reflect. And again, put ego aside and realize that you don't know everything and you may not be good at everything, and that's okay. Smart leaders, empathetic leaders, are humble enough to understand that they might have some things they need to work on to shore up their capacity. Number 2 is self-care, and that doesn't just mean massages. That just means making the time to do the things that recharge you and fill your tank again. Because again, when you go into an interaction with a full tank, you have a better capacity of being able to actively listen and not get triggered and not get offended or defensive. You can actually go into the conversation with more of a grounding. So self-care looks different for everyone in terms of practical, but one of the things I would advise is you as a leader need to model that for your team, or your team members are going to burn out. So are you taking your paid time off? Are you engaging in activities you love outside of work? And self-care can be active or passive. It doesn't have to be like yoga and meditation. It could be, for some people, it's rock climbing. For some people, it's training for a marathon. Clarity came up over and over again because the most empathetic leaders are really clear. They're clear in their expectations, in their norms, in their values. They never leave someone wondering what's going on. As we've heard Brené Brown say, clarity is kind, but it's more than that. It actually gets everyone on the same page to be achieving the same goal. There's a lot of things in our workplaces where it's sort of like, well, I just assumed, or it's this unsaid rule. Don't. Write it down, document it, talk about it, make sure everyone understands not just their job description, but what are the values of our team and what are examples of those values in action, right? They're not just pretty bullet points. You cannot hold someone accountable to an expectation you haven't clearly set. Decisiveness, A lot of times in the name of empathy, people put off difficult decisions in the name of, like we talked about earlier, trying to get consensus or trying to not make anyone upset. And that's actually less empathetic, because when you leave people in limbo, they don't know what to do next. They're stressed out, they're anxious. What am I supposed to work on? Is this important? Is this not important? When is that decision going to be made? All I can think about is this decision until it's made, right? If you're not good at decisiveness, you can practice it by just finding some low stakes decisions that need to be made. If you're all in the office, for example, let's figure out how to synthesize everyone's point of view quickly and then make a decision and then communicate it back with empathy to the team so that you're not discouraging input for the future. Put a block of time in your calendar of, this is the date by which I'm going to make this decision or consider this decision, and let everyone know so they have time to give you their input before you are going to make the decision. And then finally, joy, which is kind of a surprising one for people. When I was speaking to leaders about who had empathetic and high performing teams, there's an element of levity that they create in their environment where, again, kind of going back to the cognitive skills, people can relax and be themselves. And that frees them up to be more innovative, to take risks, to be more creative. So it doesn't mean everything you do and your work is joyful. It just means that you're creating an environment of lightness and joy. So where can you inject humor? Where can you inject lightness? Where can you inject some fun that doesn't feel forced? And to do that, you don't need to decide all that yourself as the leader and just sort of present it to the group. Solicit feedback from people. There are moments that good leaders help foster and create so that people can sort of take a breath and relax a little bit and say, okay, this is a place I really want to be.
Thank you, thank you. Like you said earlier, the empathy goes both ways. In your book, I remember one of the interesting concepts that I saw was the weaponized empathy, with the context of leaders are doing their best to be empathetic towards you and the work, everything. So how could employees do better and then try to avoid this weaponized empathy?
I love that you asked this question, because the other important thing to remember is that it's not just a leader's job to strengthen and practice empathy. It flows in both directions. And so sometimes we as an organization have to invest in helping all of our people at every level strengthen their empathy by understanding what it is and what it isn't. So, for example, if you come into the workplace and you have been in an environment or maybe been in a family that hasn't seen and modeled and rewarded empathy, your muscle is atrophied. So I think it's important to remember that this is not just a leadership exercise to invest in for your company, but you want to invest in strengthening the empathy at all levels. And when I talk about weaponized empathy, it's something that I've seen, definitely just outliers, not everyone, but I have seen this in where an employee really knows that their boss is trying to be empathetic, and they take advantage of that. They weaponize it to their own advantage. So as an example, someone I spoke to in the book anonymously said they had an employee who was consistently underperforming, but also then when they were asked to work overtime on one specific crisis they were having, the person said, "Oh, you're actually crossing a boundary by asking me to work overtime. I think I'm going to need some mental health days to process you crossing my boundary." Right? And of course, you say these words, these hot button words and phrases, and the leader backed off and then took on extra work themselves. Now, again, I do want to stress this is outliers. And the fact that we do talk about mental health and the things that we need is a very good thing. And we need to continue to do that. But many leaders kind of know the person who is gaming the system. And that's what I mean by weaponized empathy. They're actually turning their boss's empathy against them in order to get their way.
Great. In your opinion, what do you see the future of empathetic leadership? Where is it going? How do you envision the future of it?
Well, I envision that we're not going back. And I know that there's a lot of bosses out there, again, operating out of fear, think that the transformation we saw during the pandemic was a one-off. Now that we're coming out of the pandemic, we can go back to the way things were. I will say that it was already happening. The pandemic just accelerated everything. So this idea of how we define how work gets done, those questions are not going away. And so where I see the future going is that the companies that win are going to be the ones that actually accept that things have changed and adapt. I spoke on my podcast to the head of HR at Box, the tech company. And what I love about what they're doing there is they realize they don't have all the answers to how this is going to shake out. So they're doing a lot of experimentation. They've experimented with different hybrid models, with different remote working models, doing things within their offices to encourage people to come back to work and collaborate. They've experimented with different scheduling because they're trying to find the right formula. And that's where I see the future going, is that for every organization and every culture, it might look different, and that's okay. But the flexibility, obviously the diversity and inclusion, that's not going away. We need those things in order to be more successful. So I am pretty optimistic, and I see the future as more leaders embracing this, because they're going to see more leaders that embrace it win. It's not even the future of work anymore. It's here now. It looks very different, and that's okay. And so, and I'm also encouraged by seeing a lot of talk around empathy for younger kids and building that empathy muscle up from a younger age, because we are born with natural empathy. It just atrophies. Really encouraging kids, our future leaders, to embrace empathy so that they're going to come into the workforce with completely different expectations and ideas about what leadership and culture look like. So I'm really excited for that.
So we're getting to the end of our time here. Do you have any final thoughts you would like to share with our audience?
I would just say, remember to embrace empathy as a strength, not a weakness. It actually requires great strength to be able to solicit and take in different points of view without defensiveness or fear. So remember that you actually need to be quite strong in order to be an empathetic leader, and to be a leader that gets things done while being empathetic. And remember that it's both and, not either or.
Great conversation, Maria. So tell our audience, where can we get your new book, Empathy Dilemma?
Thank you so much, Louise. Well, everyone can get them at all the usual online suspects. You can also request it from your local bookstore, and you can support independent bookstores by looking for it at bookshop.org. You can also go to theempathydilemma.com, and you can find all the places to buy the book, including being able to buy it in bulk for your team at a discount. And then I also just want to add that, since we're talking to marketers here, I also offer a masterclass in how to build an empathetic brand story that actually connects and engages your ideal clients. And it's a free masterclass, so it's a free resource for folks. And they can just go to bit.ly/4step brand story, 4-step brand story. And I know you can put that link in the notes, but they may want to check that out as well.
Great. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for tuning in to This is Product Marketing, brought to you by Product Marketing Hive, a product marketing community that gives back. Check out our website, productmarketinghive.com, to join our community, meet fellow product marketers, and access free resources. If you enjoyed our podcast, please subscribe and give a 5-star rating on the platform of your choice. See you next time.